demonstrate they are not Russian made. Like Stoli Vodka clarifying its operations are in Latvia. So let's take you through archives, the history, a deep dive into vodka, the world's most popular and top-selling spirit. However, the global vodka market has actually been on decline for several years. Russian vodka dropping 79% in a decade. Many of the famous brands you see today have been around for longer than you may have thought. I worked with the first broker of Tito's Vodka in Austin, Texas, which became #1. And he said in liquor, an overnight success takes 20 years. And I think he's right. Vodka is part of the cultural identity of several Eastern European countries, from folklore, medicinal to recreational, developed over time, innovated and rapid expansion during large-scale globalization, 19th, 20th century, with roots in Poland and Russia. But Poland has the strongest evidence. You can see here, written records 1405. In Russia, from the social classes, the Russian state used vodka to keep nobility loyal, reward favourites or loosen the tongues and compromise them. Vodka politics and the Russian state have been intertwined for centuries and closely linked to state finances. Everything is decided from above in Russia. Vodka has played a key pivotal role in historical events like Tsar Nicholas II, Lenin, and later Gorbachev, all opted for prohibition. Vodka also made Russia's public health disaster, 1990s, much worse. Tax revenues for centuries, but nowadays Russia's revenues come from oil and gas. Only 1.3% of vodka drunk in the US now comes from Russia. By the way, the famous Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev did not create the 40% ABV standard. He created the periodic table, yes, but not the Russian standard as often quoted in myth. The Vodka War, and much cited A History of Vodka book by William Peklevkin, is another myth. Poland didn't sue Russia in 1977. Instead, for more accurate context, read a book called Vodka Politics by Mark Schrad. So, what has James Bond and Pepsi Cola got to do with Russian vodka, you might ask? Richard Nixon, seen in the top right, with Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, in 1959, at a trade event where an audacious Pepsi CEO, Don Kendall, insisted on him tasting the soda, becoming the first American brand to take root in the Soviet Union. As the currency was weak, payment was bartered in Stoli vodka. PepsiCo then became the vodka's US distributor in 1972. With a large network across the states, this resulted in vodka becoming the #1 spirit in US 1975. And there's 007. In 1962, Dr. No film, the vodka martini kick-started consumer demand. Smirnoff placed in several Bond movies. The 70s and 80s, vodka rose in popularity. Its clean flavour, cheap and almost versatile spirit and cocktails. A result, whiskey sales slumped. So brand influencers do matter. Sex and the City, with its Cosmo cocktails, took vodka to another level. The noughties, with their rise of women drinking population and super premium distinctive packaging, adding a little bit pizzazz. However, gin has taken the wind out of vodka's sales in the last decade. Now to recent events. As the Russian crisis unfolded, the reaction was swift. Some export strategies had to be changed or torn up in 24 hours. In week 1 of the Russian invasion, Western consumers voted with their wallets, bars and stores boycotting Russian vodka and products. Russian-made vodka became persona non grata. A $40 billion vodka industry has been rocked to the core. And why? Because of trade embargoes, high tariffs added to imports from Russian and brand Russia falling out of favour. More than 400 companies have announced suspending trade or cut back operations in Russia, expressing concern for their employees and brand reputation. However, there is talk of Russia seizing assets of companies that left Russia, including their brand and intellectual property. It's a big deal. Hence, famous corporate food and beverage brands were slow to react, and they were called out for this. Corporate peer pressure, one by one, they caved in, and only time will tell how things will pan out. Geography into sharp focus: supply chain shortages, cost rises, inflation across countries, brand pivots, and there's more than 200,000 workers in Russia still on Western payrolls. There are Russian and Belarusian restrictions from the 1st of July to all EU countries on all products. It's already difficult to ship product to Belarus and Russia simply because the main carriers, UPS, FedEx, DHL, all have embargoes. Russian Standard Vodka was number 2 vodka brand in global travel retail and 8th by volume in spirit sales in 2020. So likely some changes at the airport when you're there next. JJ Whitley Vodka is moving production from Russia to the UK and reworking all their bottle labels. And you remember, alcohol brands were quick to make hand sanitizer at the beginning of the pandemic. They read the room and showed up. Now to support Ukraine since the crisis started, alcohol brands have been inspired, quick to show support with these special bottlings. You can see donating profits to charities to help Ukraine. Budweiser, at the bottom right-hand corner, beer, Ukraine's favourite beer to be taken to the UK market for that support. And the top left is Stoli, reworked their packaging and a supporting bottle as well. Understanding a need and how they can help, social listening and reacting to be relevant. Cynics might not agree, but actually this helps build brand loyalty. Then there's Ukraine bravery. This is so powerful, this message. The Ukraine government has started a campaign in the West to build on the unprecedented outpouring of support. People are driven by emotion in the West, and this campaign will likely solidify support. Remember at the beginning of the pandemic when people were talking about the corona beer virus. It seems kind of crazy now, but there is confusion, well known that there's non-Russian brands being confused for Russian-sounding vodkas being caught off guard. Perceptions can be strong because of the cultural association of vodka in Russia. Here, the world's top-selling vodka brands, you'll recognise them. They're not actually Russian. The Russian vodka boycotts haven't really hit hard consumers with so many alternatives out there. But trade embargoes have affected importers, distributors, agreements in several countries. Ukrainian liquor businesses have been forced to shut down, mothballed. There's been some heartbreaking calls from industry colleagues. In the confusion and irony in the US, many Russian-themed businesses are owned by Ukrainians that escaped the Soviet Union, and the majority of the staff Ukrainian. So when boycotts happened, it actually affected those who were sending back money back home to help. And Scotch whisky, where I work in their drinks category, have also been affected. Exports locked out, 10th largest Scotch whisky market by volume, value of 28 million. And approximately 2,000 people in Ukraine and Russia working directly for the Scotch whisky industry caught up in this just now. So here are some Ukrainian vodkas, maybe not familiar with many people, but it's seen a huge surge in demand, but stillers have to suspend production because of the war going on, so have to source elsewhere sometimes. Brands that couldn't get in front of buyers until recently are now being in huge demand. The power of the conscious consumer is driving the agenda. Ukrainian origin vodka jumped 225% in March, Drizzly USA. There are some very good vodkas here. Many are wheat and rye grain with some high quality premium vodka. Serve with a pickle and support the cause. But as we go through here, we also look at Polish vodka, other niche of vodka. Many people and distributors are also switching their focus to Polish vodka with this long heritage of making quality spirit. You can see some of the brands here, Bison Grass and Belvedere from Poland, also LVMH. J.A. Bakevci is on the right-hand side, is particularly good. So these are worth exploring. And then UK vodka. This is craft vodka's taken off in the last 5-10 years. Black Cow from Milkway. Scottish vodkas are Beaky and Ogilvy. There's O Vodka from Wales, have done an incredible job, fastest growing brand online 2021 with the lockdowns. This is where the opportunity is. With Russian standard vodka being delisted, sales are down, leaving a £111 million gap in the UK market, according to Nielsen IQ. Craft vodka is rising in the UK with a tour visit as well for tour guides. Consumers are savvy now, so brands must listen to their consumers, are seeking clarity and transparency. According to the Mintel Global Trends Report 2022, COVID-19 has made us consider our food and drink choices more closely. 71% of UK consumers are more concerned about the environment than they were pre-pandemic. That's from an Oracle report 2022. These are two key trends. Brands need to be honest about their ongoing commitment to people and the planet. Now here's a Bacardi cocktail report, the latest one, with vodka at the top, of course, favourite flavours, taste. Drinks are ultimately about occasions. They differ where you live. Occasions, you'll find that Polish vodka is essential at Polish weddings, all important events. They also take vodka and black pepper for an upset stomach. There's Russian tradition of toasting. It's common to drink chilled vodka straight with in a shot with pickled cucumbers or caviar. In the West, it's often a mixer in cocktails or shots at a bar or club. Occasions is a core discussion for brands where they can compete and make a difference. To entice, inspire is an integral part of the human experience, an extension of one's personality, like any other luxuries in fashion or watch brands. Premium spirits are for people living a balanced lifestyle, drinking less, but drinking better. Also, the flight to e-commerce is reshaping the US retailer landscape. Virtual cooking and mixology classes during lockdowns has really paid off. More people can make cocktails now and more educated about food and drink. That can only be a good thing, eh? A few years ago, studies showed women were the regular alcohol consumer under 26 and underserved. Surprise a few people that. Until hard seltzers came along. White Claw, you maybe heard of that, took the market by storm and is a first mover advantage. It unlocked a demographic and solved a problem. This and Truly hard seltzer are actually pretty good products, tick many boxes for this consumer group. So this category has way more to go and likely premiumize further. 58% of people globally are drinking more non-alcoholic, low ABV cocktails than a year ago. NOLO for short. A demographic was not met until recently. In general, global alcohol consumption is falling, believe it or not. Alcohol brands have had to react to this consumer behavioural change. But it's not easy creating a premium product without alcohol in it for sophisticated palates. Big wins come from solving this in a compelling way. Heineken Zero did this and growth exploded through innovation. Years of research and development. It's taken decades for a good 0%er, which tastes like a good beer. Moderation is driven by a large demographic of younger people, but much more than designated driver or dry January. It's a lifestyle choice. Non-alcohol spirit cocktails are growing fast in Europe. Businesses can focus on their own capabilities, lean into where you can add value, provide an irresistible proposition to the market, and consumers will love it. Partnerships can be a way to offer something different from your core business and can avoid customer confusion. Even big brands do this blending of business models between categories. Now, this leads us to 5 consumer trends in 2022. There's a lot more than that, but we'll start with this. And no surprise, health and wellness or well-being. And number 2, your brands align with personal values. This is where the brands showing up solidarity with Ukraine comes in. Number 3, hybrid shopping, from e-commerce during the lockdown to a blended retail experience with the brands post-pandemic. You're going to see more of that. Number 4, being authentic matters. Consumers are fed up with greenwashing and virtual signaling. They want something real. Russian-sounding vodka with no heritage and in it for the profit doesn't cut these days. Show your credentials clearly. So many brands are still dining out and other successes with vague premium products and fairly average liquid inside a bottle, unfortunately. Number 5, consumers are bolder. Yes, they lost 2 years of their lives and they're not taking the BS anymore. They crave real experiences now, in person, up close, and they want to be wowed. They are more adventurous, willing to try new things and jump brands if need be. Consumers are also politically polarised, so research your audience, inspire and lead. Now, the conflict between the world's 11th largest economy and one of its biggest commodity producers affects us all. Today's brand communicators need to be responsible and pragmatic, guiding audiences towards well-being and recovery. Three's Brewery in Brooklyn recently learned the hard way as their CEO was forced to resign over vaccine mandate opinions on social media. Brewdog CEO and others, Elon Musk today with Coca-Cola, difficult for their employees with the backlash. Really, marketing teams have a really tough job. Well, here's 5 crisis calm takeaways we can all learn from. Number 1, update your scenario plans. If you haven't already, now's the time. Consider hypothetical scenarios, identify and prioritise. Think about the implications for your customers, your team and your suppliers. Number 2, prepare to adapt. Assess your exposure to the region based on supply and support needs. Consider how your strategy will accommodate volatile and evolving situations. Number 3, talk to your partners, stakeholders, and if you have PR or agency, review any potential brand issues. Brand safety considerations should be top of mind. This includes everyday activities. Context is important as things can escalate fast. Number 4, have good internal comms. Review your playbook for managing crisis comms. Add new tools that enable you to monitor situations and plans. Ensure cohesive message management. Communication will not solve an operational crisis, but can make it a lot worse. Number 5, prepare for cost implications. Budget changes may be immediate or perhaps later. So it's necessary to assess. Budgetary restrictions may affect others and other departments, activations and future plans. Above all, don't be dogmatic. Remember, it's not just messaging, it's how people speak about your brand after the messaging. It's really important. A famous case back in 1982, Johnson & Johnson recalled the Tylenol painkillers after a sabotage poison killed 7 customers. How they handled that crisis is considered the gold standard of crisis management. Remediation and rectification was used, both forgiveness strategies. Remediation offers some form of compensation to help victims, and then rectification involves taking action to prevent reoccurrence of the crisis in future, accept losses, develop sympathy, and to regain trust. This is also useful for hospitality. I used similar when I owned a delicatessen, believe it or not, in my customer service. Although the pandemic has taught us to live with crisis, it's not a crisis playbook for this current situation. A key takeaway is that big brands have long had crisis management plans and teams in place to deal with many crises: trade wars, conflict, boycotts, natural disasters, scandals, contaminated products. Crisis comes in many forms. So, as a long-term support for Ukraine, you could think of spreading the word of Horilka. Horilka means vodka in Ukraine. It's triple distilled, and Horilka is an integral part of Ukrainian gatherings. So we say Horilka, and I've got my pickle ready as well. And it's been used since the 18th century, made from wheat. So some final thoughts. Tourism is back, Western Europe. I was in Paris a few weeks ago and locals were agreeing it's back. So expect this season to be busy in some parts of the world. Revenge tourism, Prepare for it. It's not 2020, it's not 2021. Your performance will reflect on how proactive you are. Vodka tourism, hard to tell. Things are changing so quickly just now. Data is going to change. Because Finland is EU's most expensive country for alcohol, and then it's Sweden, they hop on shopping cruises and ferries for duty-free to Tallinn, Estonia. It's slowly returning. Apart from the cross-border trade between Finland and Russia, but tourists from Scandinavia visit border shops down the Via Baltica highway down to Poland from Tallinn. But further south, Bulgaria normally has 500,000 Russian tourists. That's estimated to be this year a maximum 50,000, huge drop this summer. And the Black Sea resorts will be quiet, I expect. Less tourists in the countries near Ukraine for the fear of war, unfortunately. I suspect it will be Q1 2023 before we see the return of Chinese tourists in Europe, the way things are going over there. Elsewhere in drinks tourism, breweries, wineries and distilleries upgraded equipment and their visitor centres through the pandemic. I saw this recently in rum distilleries in the Caribbean, and check out hundreds of wineries and the distillery trail in America. Ireland has terrific new distilleries ripe for a road trip. So adventure waits. If you come to Scotland, my country, of course, yes, you want to see Scotch whisky distillery, of course. Well, the Spirit of Speyside Festival just kicked off, just started. Over 600 events. It's a big deal for tourism in the Highlands. If you're a tourism business, make sure to include, to champion your neighbourhood, collaborate and eke out those golden nuggets that elevate a visitor experience. As Eric said, I'm co-chair of the Wine and Beverages practice area at the World Food Travel Association, along with wine expert Robin Shaw. Happy birthday, Robin. We are driving the conversation on beverages, playing a central role in food tourism, education solutions to meet the demand. So as you can see, this is my final slide. I specialise in drinks education and integrating food and drink together at a molecular level, fun and exciting ways. Menu pairing is a great way to provide that. Foodies really crave it, you know, which is a real big demographic. The glue to a good vacation, and what sets the glue is the warm hospitality and compelling stories from tour guides and visitor centres. Your guests will love you for creating unique memories. Uniqueness is powerful. And I'll see you in Scotland. Thanks very much for listening.
Ewan, wow, thank you. I've never heard you speak professionally before, and it's like you're around a campfire telling ghost stories. I love it. Is that where you learned how to speak?
Sorry?
Is that where you learned how to speak?
That's how most Scottish people learn to speak. As kids, we were, I was brought up in scouting, and there was always the scout leaders, and this heritage of ghost stories in Scotland, you know. The further you go away from urban areas, and I found this when I was in some of the areas like Sinai in Morocco, you know, the Berbers or the tribes. The further away you go from urban areas, you know, people are more superstitious, and it's the same. There's a map behind me of Scotland, and there's islands there, and islands people are quite superstitious. So when you go camping trips, when we were kids, there was always ghost stories and things like that. So that's why Scotch whisky, you know, I mentioned earlier there about Scotch whisky falling out of fashion in the 70s and 80s. But a lot of it's also to do with it was very difficult for people to come in. Vodka, it was easy. There wasn't a difficult. The people feel intimidated by whiskey, and so they just went with the easy choice of vodka. It was clean. It was easy to go with. Whereas whiskey was more complicated, and you know, maybe people felt embarrassed if they didn't know the history, and so it was quite austere. In fact, from a tourism point of view, back in the 70s and 80s, if you turned up at a visitor centre, there wasn't a visitor centre at distilleries, but if you turned up at a distillery, they would tell you where to go. That was how the world was back then. So now it's all open visitor centres and very warming, and all the brand ambassadors and people work at distilleries. Everyone's very friendly, and there's all the storytelling going around the world with the brands at the events and things like that. So whiskey's come back into the conversation to make themselves relevant by doing that, and being more open to younger audiences and women, and just making himself much more relevant. So, but anyway, back to vodka.
Well, I have a couple questions for you, and I'd encourage anyone else to put the questions they have for you in the Q&A channel. But you had talked about the Stolichnaya changing its name to Stoli, which everyone calls it Stoli anyway. So it probably was a very smart branding move on their perspective. But what would you say would be the pros and cons of their name change for a big brand like that?
Yeah, so they realize they're a more Western brand, than selling in Russia itself. It's a bigger proposition. The fact that they have such a big base in America and Europe, so it was a necessary evil for them in a sense, but there's also the confusion, the fact that it wasn't actually, although it was Russian in origins at the beginning, it's changed over time. And then it's like a lot of different categories in the drinks industry. Things can be made in different places, and there's a bit of marketing involved, so they don't always want to tell you where things are made, so for that it was you have to protect your brand. That's the ultimate, the bottom line for these things. You have such a big company, and you've got stakeholders, and you have to really protect your brand. So it's super important to go where your audience is and where your customers are. So it makes complete sense. Most people actually, if you look at the trade, the on-premise trade in America or in the UK or in different countries, somebody that orders a Stoli, they're going to call it a Stoli anyway. So, shortening it is it's a natural progression in a sense anyway, really,
Yeah. Well, the Australians would do that for anyone anyway, right? They just shortened everything to speak in half sentences and stuff. So maybe it was Australian inspired. Got another question for you. So as you explained that spirits are deeply rooted in national identity, could the producers distance themselves from the political decisions to protect their brand? How does that work and play?
Yeah, so it depends on the regions. There's PGI status in some of the countries I mentioned there. There's some things that seem to stick. Some people seem to think vodka is made with potatoes. A small percentage actually made from potatoes. It's more expensive, and the grains are cheaper, although the grain prices will be going up now. But as far as government control, it's not as strict as things like the Scotch Whisky Association. When it comes to what people should be, what companies should be doing. So as far as brands are concerned, they're growing with the trends. So the trends that I mentioned there, I mean, some of these vodka brands will now start to think about low and known now. They'll have to think of what direction, because Heineken deliberately did it because they realised that the craft beer market, which is going to dip and it's going to start falling, the beer markets. So they get to a certain sort of ceiling level. They've got to make decisions, and then where the next audience is coming from, because generational shifts. So you've got to adapt over time for that, But there's I mentioned Horilka. I mean, and I showed you the Ukrainian vodkas, but there is an opportunity for. Obviously, there's awards now, so it's not really the best time to be discussing it. But the Ukrainian identity and countries' identities, like Ukraine's, sovereignty is being targeted in a big way just now. So supporting things that are uniquely Ukrainian, and even having those framed more and support more. I mean, it's great that big companies like Budweiser are going to bring in these Ukrainian brands and things like that, because of the demand. But I think that's, it's really like campaign grassroots that people can support and move these initiatives forward. But when it comes to brands, they stay out of the politics as much as possible. The Scotch Whisky Association is actually quite involved in politics, but there's a lot of other spirits that will stay out of politics and just go where their markets are, where they can, and pivot where they need to go. If things are not good in one market, they'll pivot to another market.
Okay, sounds reasonable. All right, we do have a one question here. What are your predictions for beverage tourism in Serbia? That was unexpected. With its complex positioning, what do you think of the global reach of rakia? I'm not sure if I said that right.
Rakia, yeah.
Rakia?
It's probably similar to raki, but the raki goes all the way through down to Crete and Cyprus and different countries, Serbia is a difficult country politically, closer to Russia. Some of the countries are kind of caught. I've been speaking to a lot of colleagues in the drinks industry in different countries in the last couple of weeks for this talk, and there's the proximity to Russia and the closeness. It can have an effect because there's going to be a backlash sometimes. But anywhere that's quite close, I'm speaking to some people I know from the drinks industry in Bulgaria. There's really big problems now for the countries, because if you're close to, like the Black Sea resorts, people are not going to be going, things like that. But so Serbia, it's a difficult one with tourism. I've not spoken to anybody directly in Serbia, but I know that Serbia is quite closer to Russia in a sense, so there's a lot of sentiment for Russia. So how well that goes down, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But the unique spirits, there is an opportunity for these unique spirits to grow and expand, but it's really up to, I think, people that did a really good job, like Bordeaux marketing tourism. You group together and you club together and promote your spirits, your producers, and it's like we have a phrase in Scotland, gang together, so I think that works really well if you're going to start taking raki to the world. It's very hard to do it in yourself, if you're doing exports. I'm very experienced with exports and things like that, but you really need backing, and you need to bring together the producers and put a compelling story together, some nice marketing, for it to really start moving and get the people in the bars and restaurants in Serbia. So the tourism there they need to buy into it and serve it. So if it's like an after dinner or an aperitif, so you have the bars and restaurants that they promote it a big way. Look at Aperol Spritz. I mean, Aperol Spritz just exploded with Campari.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fastest growing drink that ever. I think the way things worked out, and back in the day, it used to be Campari and soda. When I was in Italy, it was always like an aperitif of Campari and soda, and then it's Campari Spritz, and it just exploded around the world, But that was natural roots in on-trade and restaurants and bars and people just taking it on, So you need to persuade a lot of people on the on-premise for that, to really take it forward,
Yeah. Well, I think in the case of Serbia as well, they need to learn to walk before they can run. We have a supplier in Serbia, and we've been working with them for about 3 years, and they know obviously what industry we're in. And so we talk sometimes about the food and beverage scene in Serbia. And there's, every country, not every country, but most countries have a great food or drink story to tell. And they share stories of their wonderful food and drink. The world has no clue about it. You compare that to neighboring Croatia or Slovenia, right? Which, or even Bulgaria with their wines. I mean, these countries are starting to really make strides, and Serbia is not making the same kinds of strides. So maybe it just has to do with national policy or who's doing what there, priorities and so on.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of challenges, of course, now, because people are focusing on how they're going to get oil and gas just now. That's going to be, so there's a lot of things. When conflict comes, when crisis comes, it overtakes everything. And so when people want to try and bring new ideas, sometimes it gets squashed and pushed to the side,
Well, as I was saying in my opening presentation, with crisis comes opportunity, according to the Chinese proverb. So We have one more question, and it has to do with, do you think rum will be the next big thing in Western Europe? People have been talking about it, but it doesn't seem to have any legs yet.
Yeah, so I'm actually a rum specialist. That's my department, and yes, I'm a big believer it is, because some people are talking about taking a little bit over from gin as the gin craze starts to subside a little bit. Vodka can take it. It's got a great opportunity just now. Actually, it's in the limelight just now. But rum is very versatile, and is made in about 40, 50 countries. It's really exploded. I've made some YouTube videos about the different markets and regions of rum. I mean, when I was studying for the seminars, there's 400 distilleries making rum in Australia. There's hundreds. There's at least 500 in America. So when people are making craft gin and vodkas and things like that, the craft brewers and whatever. So they're now making rum as well and making whiskey. So they're moving across categories. Most of the drinks, like Australia Drinks Association, they don't know how many actually making rum. There's that many of them. So the rum, there's actually a deep history, goes back to the 1800s in Australia. So there's rum, obviously the traditional Caribbean. The big challenge, you've got lots of challenges going on just now, of course. It seems to be a perfect storm. There's shortage of glass going on. There's a shortage of American whiskey barrels. So the ex-bourbon barrels that most rum use, there's a bit of a shortage going on, so as cost rises. But I was in the Caribbean in Barbados, some fantastic upgrades in the distilleries, some great tours, and I was at Rum Fest in Paris, the biggest show in the world there, and it's very vibrant rum. There's so much diversification in the category as well. So there's a Scottish company actually did a crowdcube fund there, and they blew the budget when the investors. It was like 350 grand they got. So there is a desire to move into rum more now. So it's really quite a fascinating category. The Scottish rums are exploding. There's lots of
Do you think
distilleries.
rums are the next spirit that's going to overtake vodka?
I'm not sure if it overtake. I mean, vodka is actually still a very big market, and it's rum's a good bit behind it. So we'll see. Time will tell. Rum has its challenges because of volumes and aging. Like vodkas doesn't have to age, gins don't have to age, so they're very easy. You can put them out in 48 hours or so, and distill it. And with rum, it's usually about aging, so it does take time. And so I'm not sure. I mean, there are some very big volumes in rum, but I think really the premiumization is where it's going with rum, and that's the big trend. So it's a bit like whiskey. It's kind of turning into that kind of scarcity, limited and aged bottles and things like that. So
Okay.
So there's some added costs in rum as well, with the angel share being so high and things like that.
All right, last question, because we need to wrap up and move into the next room. And quick answer, Ewan. So the current situation has highlighted the need to properly inform consumers of the actual origin of PGI, PDO, et cetera, products. How would you go about informing consumers of this?
It's down to education, really. Like, the brands really have to stand up now. There's a lot of brands, like I mentioned earlier, that it's all about their packaging and, putting liquid in bottle, but they really need to stand up and promote their category a lot more, and you can say that for a number of drinks. Support your category. So I'm expanding my training for whiskey and for rum, because there's a lot of training required for rum as well. But the insights I gave there earlier with the history and things like that, I don't see many brands putting that kind of information out. So and you're really showing your credentials. Obviously, they use a lot with the awards. Awards is the big thing. They keep banging on about awards, but that's great and smashing. But I think they really need to talk more about their heritage and the PGI and what goes into the bottle. Like the consumers I mentioned earlier are interested in where it started. Sustainability is a big thing as well. What's your practices? Glass is actually quite carbon heavy, believe it or not. So things like Eco Spirits has done a great job. This is a really big deal in the drinks industry, but it's not got the press yet, just as much as it could do with. But education, basically, it needs a lot more education. I don't see many vodka masterclasses, vodka, seminars, trade people coming together, creating synopses and things like that. I don't see a lot of that happening in vodka. So they could do a lot more with that.
Well, we need to wrap up. Ewan, thank you. Really enjoyed your talk. I learned something new every day. Definitely learned something new from you. There is one more question, but we'll need to do that by email after, because we do need to head into the next session. So everyone who is here, please go ahead straight away into the next webinar, and we will go into that room right away and get started with Olpa over there immediately. Ewan, thank you again. Really fascinating stuff. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you in the next room shortly.